I think the great challenge of understanding Yirmiyahu is that the book itself is not in chronological sequence of his life, and that's the great challenge. And Rabbi Bini Lau, who incidentally lost his father, sitting Shivanau's father, was the great Naftali Lavi. Naftali Lavi was the consul general. You probably had
No, I know his son.
His son is Bini.
No, there's another son.
Oh, there's another son.
Amichai Lau Lavi.
Amichai. So Naftali Lavi over the weekend passed away. And Naftali was the man whose brother is Rabbi Yisrael Meir Lau, the chief rabbi, was the chief rabbi of Israel, and he actually took care of him during the war.
Sure, and they were with Elie Wiesel in a camp.
Yes, I think that's what I remember being told.
So why is he?
And so his son Bini has written on Jeremiah and has tried to also look at the book and to try to patch it together, and that really is the great challenge. I go back to Jessica's question, to Yiska's question, all the way back. Why didn't we do chapter 2 before chapter 3? Well, because the sense is that chapter 2 really occurs in his life after chapter 3. It's hard to really patch it together like that, and admittedly, I'm taking a stab at it. I'm leaning on Bini and others, but we have already gone through the first phase of Yirmiyahu's life. Let's just remind ourselves. Yirmiyahu begins to prophesy in the reign of Yoshiyahu. Yoshiyahu is described in Kings 2. And these numbers, Kings 1 and Kings 2, are not our numbers, they're Christian numbers. There is really one book of Samuel, is one book of Malachi, and one book of Kings, but the breakdown into two different books, just like the chapters, are really not Jewish demarcations, they're Christian demarcations, but so that there be a universal way of study, we have kept to those chapters. Sentences are our sentences as we see them. But the first phase of Yirmiyahu's life is he begins to prophesy in the 13th year of Yoshiyahu. That's when he's prophesying. That's when he begins to prophesy. But Yoshiyahu is the grandson of Menashe. We're just reviewing some of this because we have to understand the historical context. Who had ruled for 55 years. And Menashe is considered to be perhaps the most wicked king ever. So wicked that in the time of Menashe there really was no true prophet. There had been false prophets, but there was no true prophet.
And he killed Yeshayahu.
And he kills Yeshayahu. And Menashe is followed by his son Amon, who rules for but 2 years. So it's then that Yoshiyahu comes on the scene. Yoshiyahu is coming after 57 years of a desert spirituality, if you will, if we can coin that kind of phrase. And
Who was he until then?
Yoshiyahu was a little boy.
No, I mean Jeremiah.
Jeremiah is born just about. Jeremiah begins to prophesy. He's born born a little bit. I would say that he's born probably towards the end of the life, very end of the life of Yoshiyahu. He begins to prophesy in the 13th year of Yoshiyahu's reign.
And how old was he?
It's to my knowledge, it's unclear, but he was a very young man. Yirmiyahu was a very young man. And he's prophesying in the 13th year of Yoshiyahu. So we have the picture. Yoshiyahu follows Menashe and Amon, 57 years cumulatively of a terrible kingdom. He's coming on the scene, and he only begins to prophesy in the 13th year of Yoshiyahu. That is the first stage of his prophecy. And the first stage of his prophecy continues for 5 years. That is, from the 13th year of Yoshiyahu till the 18th year of Yoshiyahu. And it is then that Yirmiyahu's prophecy are prophecies that have a dual nature that we have been discussing until now. One nature is he is prophesying to the north, asking that the north reunite with the south. Now, there is no sovereignty in the north. The northern kingdom had been exiled 150 years or whatever it is, 100 years earlier, 120 years earlier. But he's prophesying to the remnants who had remained in the north to reunite with the south. And there, I think, his prophecy is one of great hope. He says to the north, reunite. But concomitantly, he is turning to the people of Judah, and he prophesies about the decay of Judah. He's talking in very, very harsh terms about Judah. Incidentally, when we spoke about the prophecy to the north, we studied Jeremiah. We're giving a test at the end of this semester. It's chapter 3 and chapter 31. Those are our key chapters. And when he's talking about the decay of Judah, that's chapter 2. We are now entering into the second stage of Jeremiah's prophecy. That stage is beginning in the 18th year of Yoshiyahu. Now, what happens in the 18th year of Yoshiyahu? That is when the Great Reformation begins. Something happens to Yoshiyahu. Now remember, again, saying it once again, Yoshiyahu is coming off past generations that were just horrific. But something happens. It's not clear why it happens, but let me tell you what happens, and maybe you can tell me why, what inspired this to happen. Yoshiyahu turns to his scribe, whose name is Shaphan, and says to Shaphan, I want you to go to the temple and speak to a man, and his name is Chilkiyahu. And Chilkiyahu is the high priest. Now we know the name Chilkiyahu. How do we know Chilkiyahu the priest? Because he in fact happens to be Jeremiah's father. It's Yirmiyahu ben Chilkiyahu. So Yoshiyahu turns to Shaphan, says to Shaphan, go to Chilkiyahu, and the temple that had been in disarray from the reign of Menashe and Ammon and the beginning years of Yoshiyahu. So Yoshiyahu says, see what you can to spiritually and physically rebuild and reconstruct, not literally rebuild, but bring back the temple to what it should be. Menashe, that had brought idols into the temple and had desecrated the temple, re-sanctified the temple. And that's exactly what Chilkiyahu the priest does. And as Chilkiyahu is doing it, he famously finds in the temple a Sefer Torah. He finds a Torah.
So all these years, there was no Pesach, because they didn't have the Torah.
All these years, there was no, probably not, there was no Torah. He finds the Sefer Torah. And let's pick it up in the Book of Kings, if we can. Everybody take a sheet.
What year are we, in the common era, before, what year?
Well, the temple is destroyed.
70,
The temple,
70.
right, the temple is destroyed.
The first one, yeah.
The temple was destroyed in 586 of the common era.
Right,
And Yoshiyahu himself reigns for 31 years.
yeah, BCE. right.
And following Yoshiyahu, there's about another, I would say, 45 years. So 45, it's 45 plus 31 minus 18. How much is 45 plus 31? I'm too old for this. 76 minus 18.
That's
fourth grade math.
Okay.
58.
Okay, it's 58. So it's 58 years before 586 of the common era. I leave it to you.
So it's a long time.
To figure it out. It's right there. So it's at that time.
What do you
So
mean there
here's
was no
what
Pesach? They had you all-
the text
They didn't have a
says.
Torah.
Let's take a look at this page.
So
But the
what?
tradition came about, no? And the
You
sacrifices.
can't do anything unless you have the Torah, and the people know what they're about.
I mean, they
Well,
didn't have the Passover,
you
the
know,
Pesach sacrifice?
Estelle asks a great question. A great question. You know, the Torah has tremendous importance, certainly in terms if you understand Judaism as a faith, Judaism as a religion. I think it makes a great contribution in understanding Judaism as a nation as well. you're correct, Estelle, as usual, that there were those who argued, even in recent history, Moses Mendelssohn famously, when he came on the scene, he was the one, I would argue that Moses Mendelssohn is probably the father of all of the opening of the Orthodox community. In fact, he's the father of Reform Judaism as far as I'm concerned, and Conservative Judaism, and the modern Orthodox, and yes, the open Orthodox community. I heard my son lecture on this. This past week was one of the greatest weeks of my life, just listening to him and watching him. One lecture is to 90 students. There are only about 5 or 6 Jews in the class, and I'm sitting in the third row waiting for the professor to come in. And I turn to a student and ask her her name. And she tells me her name. I said, "How do you like the professor?" And she says, "I love the professor. I love this course." And she's Asian. I said, "That's nice, because I love the professor too. He's my son." And she almost fell off a chair. Oh my God.
That was a difficult question to ask.
I didn't, it's a dangerous question.
You
to
sit
ask.
in the back row.
I sit in the back row. I wanted to hear it all, and I had been in my hearing aid, so I wanted to hear it very. So when he was talking about how Mendelssohn really, in order to be accepted in Germany, it was critical for, at that point, for Judaism to be spoken of as a faith and not a nation. It's very interesting. As a faith and not a nation. It's fascinating.
First to descend.
And I think that when you read the Torah really speaks, I think, about a faith/nation. My reaction to that is that even when you look at the denominations now, we may look at the Torah differently. The Orthodox may look at every word of the Torah to be from God, the conservative a little bit less, inspired by God or whatever, and the Reform a little, whatever, but the Torah plays a very, very central role in all that. Without the Torah, I think even when you think about Ben Gurion, you think about the founders of the state. I'm jumping around a little bit. These were people, Estelle, who, every Saturday night or whatever, they studied Torah. They wanted to study the Torah. The Torah is very, very critical. Not that they kept. It's not that they put on Rabbeinu Tam Tefillin, but the Torah does play a very central role. And there was no Torah, and Yitzchak is saying there's no Passover. I think even in contemporary times, when they do surveys of the commitment of Jews, what you find is that the vast majority of Jews will say, even those who are distant, that the one holiday that they're going to that they are involved with is, however the Seder looks, it's the Seder. There is no Seder, or I would say also Yom Kippur. Probably people identify with Yom Kippur on some level. So we're in that vacuum where there is no Torah, and they find the Torah. And so the text says, we're picking it up, it says, with this sheet, which I just distributed, you can pass it out.
Of course.
Vayaged Shaphan HaSofer LaMelech Lemor. And Shaphan says to the king, now we're at the top of the page. Sefer, now we're studying from Kings 2. Sefer Natan Li Hilkiah HaKohen. The high priest Hilkiah has given me a scroll.
What verse?
I'm right at the top of the page. We're in the middle of the verse. I had problems Xeroxing one side. I couldn't get the previous side. Shuli was not there today, so this is very good. I want to thank Gila for doing this. He says, listen, Shaphan says to the king, Chilkiah the Kohen. Who is Chilkiah again?
The high priest.
Father of Yirmiyahu. Vayikraehu Shaphan lifnei hamelech. You read that, it sounds like the king didn't even know how to read. I mean, you could argue maybe he just wanted somebody to read it for him. But you could argue that he didn't even know how to read. So Shaphan reads it for the king.
Maybe he's nearsighted at that.
Kishmoa hamelech et divrei sefer haTorah. This is quite famous. When the king heard the words of the scroll of the teaching, Vayikra et bigadav, he rent his clothes. When do we rent our clothes? It's a sign of mourning. And there is a teaching there is a teaching that they open the Torah and they open to a particular sentence, to Midrash Halacha. This is now rabbinic. It's not Avi Weiss. It's a Midrash Halacha, so it's not in the text, but there is a teaching that it opened to chapter 26 in Deuteronomy, and in chapter 26 of Deuteronomy, it says, chapter 27, he opened to the verse, sentence 26, Arur asher lo yakim et divrei haTorah hazot lasot otam. Cursed be he who has not upheld the terms of the teaching and observed them. This is the famous incident when they were standing on top of Mount Gerizim and Mount Eval. And God says the Torah is going to be written out, the covenant is going to, that is, be reaffirmed. And half the tribe was on one side, the other half on the other side. And when one half reads out, cursed will be those who did not uphold the words of the Torah to do them, and then all the people have to say, Amen, yes. If the people don't do the Torah, they will be cursed. And according to this rabbinic legend, it's at that page that Shaphan opened up the Torah and read it. And it struck the king very deeply. And when he heard the words, cursed is the person who has not upheld the Torah, so at that point the king said, we will uphold the Torah. He made this quick decision. You know, sometimes in life, changes come very gradually. Right? There's a wonderful story. It's taken from the sentence in Tanakh. How far is east from west? How far is east from west? And it became a rabbinic legend where a student comes to the Rebbe and the student says to the Rebbe, there's no hope for me. All is lost. I've done so much wrong. I can't turn myself around. And the Rebbe quotes the sentence, how far is east from west? And says to the student, how far is east from west? So the student says, how far is east from west? It's from one end of the universe to the other end of the universe. Or another student says, it's from one end of the world to the other end of the world. Or to Americanize it, oh, it's from New York to California. Or you want to synagogue it, it's from the eastern wall to the western wall. That's how far is east from west. And the Rebbe says, no, that's not the case. How far is east from west? I'll tell you how far it is. If you're facing east, just one dray, just turn around, and you're facing west. Facing west, just turn around, and you're facing east. How far is east from west? In Yiddish, ein dray, just one turn will turn you around. One turn. I tell that story very fondly because about a year ago, back to the Rabbah incident, I had a fallout with one of my closest friends, who I felt, I didn't mind when people criticized me. I really don't, because I think that that's fair play. But I felt that the criticism of this person was too personal and it was beyond the point. And I couldn't talk to that person. I couldn't say good Shabbos to him. I can thank, with all the people who have disagreed with me, there are many, I can't think of on one hand people I wouldn't say good Shabbos to and give a hug to. I don't think I can count on 5 fingers. He's one of the few. And I tell this story. I tell the story about how far is east from west. One dray. My point was, you don't have to do it gradually. Sometimes in life, boom, this, like a bolt of lightning. Just turn around and you're facing the opposite direction. I don't know, I walk out, I had not seen this person for a long time, and who's in the lobby? He's in the lobby. I say, oh my God, I haven't seen him in weeks. And I just tell this story on Rosh Hashanah and all that, so we can kill him. He's in the lobby. And I don't want to sound too fundamentalist, but for me, I said, maybe God is speaking to me. I said, I think I got to walk up to him and say, have a good year. And I felt I couldn't do it. I went back into the shul. The shul was absolutely empty. and I close the door, I sit down, and I go through my meditative mode, which I often do, and I said, I gotta try to do this. And I walked out, and he's there, and I held my breath, I went up, and I went to him, and I said, Shana Tova. I said his name, I said, Shana Tova. And he hugged me, and he whispers in my ear, Avi, I'll always love you. And it's not like it's all, as my kids would say, hunky-dory, but it was a good step, and I must say that over the year things have gotten better.
Was it a personal thing, or just
It
something
was a
you
personal
did?
thing.
Oh, it was
It was something I did. It had to do with Rabbah, but it turned very personal, and
But it still sticks with you, no matter how much you turn around, certain things in life, it always sticks with you.
I'll tell you, I'm a little off topic here. Anger takes a lot of energy, too much energy, and I felt such a relief. It's not that good to be angry, and my youth was a youth who were protesting against the world. Forget about righteous rebel. It's an angry rebel. I was angry.
Basketball playing rebel.
Angry. Susan can tell you that she saw me in moments where I was just full of. Susan's a great reporter. I'm just full of anger, and my point is that it's not a non sequitur. Yoshiyahu, something happened that day. You may not believe the midrash. It's okay. I like the midrash, so I want to believe it. But I'm not telling you to believe it or not believe it. I'm telling you that it's not in the text. It's a rabbinic tradition. But what it's saying is that something happened as that was being read to him, and it just hit him. It was like a bolt of lightning. They say, Michael, that Franz Rosenzweig, I heard this from Rabbi Soloveitchik, was about ready to convert to Christianity. You know the story? What's the story?
Well, I'm trying to think of his exact words. It is no longer necessary. It is no longer possible. I'm not sure whether I got the order.
The story that
right,
he tells is, it's right. The story is that he was ready to put the word Christianity. It's on Yom Kippur.
Mhm.
And he sees in the distance a small little shtibel, a little synagogue. And he's drawn to it. And he goes in. Something happened. It's inexplicable. Something happened. And it just turned him around. Not aim Dre. Sometimes it's that one. I love this idea because I think it's true in life. I think often it takes a lot of time, but sometimes one can change destiny just with one turn. I've had a fallout with someone like I did. It's not like you can make perfect peace, but one turn points one in a very, very different direction. Right, Danny went through, was a recipient of a kidney from a Hasidic rabbi. Just one turn. Thank God Danny's here with us for many, many more years. So when the king heard the words of the scroll of the teaching, and according to the Midrash, it was that one sentence, cursed is the person that doesn't uphold the law. And at that instant, what does he say? We will uphold it. What does he do? He rends his clothes. Vayitzav HaMelech et Chilkiah HaKohen, and he commands all of these people and says the following, sentence 13. He turns to all these people, L'chu Yeshu et Adonai ba'adi u'ba'ad ha'am, u'ba'ad kol Yehuda al divrei ha'sefer ha'nitzah hazeh. Go inquire of the Lord on my behalf, and on behalf of the people, and on behalf of all Judah, concerning the words of this scroll that has been found. Ki gedolah chamat Adonai asher nitzta banu. For great indeed must be the wrath of the Lord that has been kindled against us. Al asher lo shamu avotenu, because our fathers did not obey divrei hasefer hazeh, the words of this scroll, lasot, to do kechol hakatuv aleinu, that has been prescribed for us. And with that begins the Reformation. Now, I just wanted to suggest the following, that while it is true that according to this text, when the text is read to him, something hits the king, and he says, we're going to start this, we're going to turn a new page. What prompted him, however, to tell Shaphan, the scribe, to tell Chilkiyahu, the priest, to re-sanctify the temple? What was it? It's not clear. But it just seems to me it seems obvious. And sometimes what seems obvious may be the most least true, but to me it seems obvious that it was the prior 5 years of Jeremiah's prophecy. Because Jeremiah had been prophesying in the time of Yoshiyahu from his 13th year to the 18th year. And he had been in the streets of Jerusalem talking about the decay of Judah. My sense is that Yoshiyahu probably read about it or heard about it. He hears about it, something pushes him, it triggers something in him, and he asks that this re-sanctification take place. Now look what happens. So you have the picture, we have the political picture of what's happening. We're in the 18th year, the Reformation is beginning. Yoshiyahu says, it's hope, it's optimism, things are going to be great. Joseph Telushkin, in his book, The Rebbe, which is a beautiful book, he says that one of the great contributions of the Rebbe was that he was always optimistic. He liked optimistic language.
Yeah.
Yoshiyahu was this optimist. I mean, because it's not so simple to be the leader of a society that was so negative and to come in and say, we're going to turn it around.
This is Judea.
This is Judea. Judea was on the way out. And then Yoshiyahu
Was
says,
there unrest?
there's hope. Like, we're going to just turn it around. We're going to do better. Rabbi Telushkin gives examples about the Rebbe, that the Rebbe never liked to use the word hospital. In Hebrew, how do you say a hospital? Bet
Yeah, but he
Bet
said-
Cholim.
Right, but it's a bet
He never used the term Bet Cholim. He uses the term Bet
before.
Refuah.
Yeah.
Marpeya. Why is it a place of
Healing.
Why is there a place for the sick? It's a place of healing. I often say that our synagogue, there are two kinds of synagogue. There's synagogues that's a country club, where everybody's perfect. And then there's a synagogue, and this is my model, a synagogue should be a hospital. And when people push back and say, a hospital, that's not a nice place, I say, no. Hospital is a place of healing. I didn't quite say what the Rebbe said. It's a place of healing. And a synagogue should be a place of healing. There are other examples, like, for example, how do you say wounded soldiers? The way you say wounded soldiers in Hebrew is pitsuei tzahal, the wounded of tzahal. The Rebbe never used the language pitsuei tzahal. He used to use the language tzadikei tzahal, the righteous ones of tzahal. Just language. Telushkin says, my friend Joe says, the Rebbe didn't like the idea that you had to give in an assignment and you had a deadline. He just didn't like the word deadline. But apparently the Rebbe didn't have an alternative word. Telushkin, who's a genius with words, he found the word. He says, why do I have to call it a deadline? Call it a due date. Deadline is the end. The due, you're being born, you're being created. You have to be, there's a lot of beauty to that. You know, like when Shimon Peres turned 90 years old, they said to him, what's the secret in life? 90, and he's so full of life. He says, listen, in life, you have a choice. You can either be a pessimist, or you can be an optimist. That was his language, basically. It's on YouTube all over. He says, for the same price, I decided, guess what? I'll be an optimist. Why not? Look at the world optimistically. And Yoshiyahu is this great, great optimist. But he needs some help. And Yoshiyahu understands that to really succeed, he has to have a union. He has to work together. A good king is always working together in Tanakh with whom? With a
Navi.
Navi, always with a prophet. When Menashe had no prophet, and had no Navi Emet, you knew he was in trouble. Every person of import, David, whatever you think of him, it was a Navi. It was going to be Natan, a Navi. There was going to be a Navi. Shaul. Who's Shaul's Navi? Shmuel. It's a system. The whole system in America of checks and balances. It's a sophisticated system, but it's basically the system in the Torah. The king is the executive branch, and the Navi is the spiritual religious branch. And the matter of fact, is going to be a legislative and a judicial branch. That's going to be the Sanhedrin. So what does Yoshiyahu realize? That within his spirit of hope, who does he need help from? He needs help from Yirmiyahu. He needs help from a Navi. Let's see what it says. Let's see what it says. So in sentence 13, he says, seek out the Lord. Go inquire of the Lord on my behalf. Well, what do you mean, go inquire of the Lord? He's saying this to Chilkiyahu. He's saying to Chilkiyahu, go inquire of the Lord. Now you go inquire of the Lord. What does it mean, go inquire of the Lord? Go inquire of a Navi, of a prophet. So you would think Chilkiyahu, he knows a prophet. Who does he know? The son.
Right.
You would think he's part of this group, he would go to his son. What does it say? Vayelech Chilkiyahu HaKohen V'achikam. These are all the people. V'achbor V'shafan V'asaya El Hulda HaNeviya Eshet Shalom Ben Tikva. Got my glasses here. Get it exactly right. Ben Charchat Shomer HaBgadim V'hi Yoshevet B'Yushalayim B'Mishneh. Right? She was living in Jerusalem, in one of the quarters of Jerusalem. Vayidabru Eleha.
Is this the first time she's mentioned?
First time she's mentioned. And what's the obvious question?
Why not Yirmiyahu?
Why don't they go to Yirmiyahu? Why don't they go to Yirmiyahu?
Because he's the son of Chilkiyahu. Maybe they felt it was a
Conflict of interest.
conflict of interest.
Maybe he was the first open Orthodox king. They wanted to go to a woman.
Now that's a very good answer. Howie, could you please get that on tape? That Milton saying that. Did you get that?
Seriously. Everybody always says, nowadays the women, we have Devorah, we have Miriam and the Torah, we have so many, and everybody always, nobody, whatever, that's the discussion. So he was open, he was a graduate
There's
of
a
Chovevei.
discussion at Chovevei Torah today.
Yeah.
The chairman of the board was there, so the student said that there's a women's rabbinical school that we started, Yeshivat Marat, that ordains, we openly say, give smicha. Now I understand Rabbi Riskin is giving smicha, so I'm doing it. And, thank God we're in much better shape than we were 4 years ago. And Stephen Liebman, a wonderful man, so one of the students says to him, this Yeshivat Marat, we're finding that they're getting positions that if they were not around, we would be getting. It's interesting. And the fact of the matter is that there are many rabbis now, we're at the point now, where senior rabbis, if they're looking for an assistant, they prefer looking for a woman spiritual leader. We're actually finding that is occurring. One of the answers that Stephen gave was that, long term, 10 years from now, it's going to work to your benefit because the women will by then be the senior rabbis. And when they want an assistant, then they'll tap you. It's really like, oh my God, where this is really, we're going light years. Anyway, so this is the Gemara. This is the Gemara, big book. So this is what question is asked in the Talmud Megillah. And the Talmud says the following. The Yoshiyahu Gufe. You see, even though the text says here that Chilkiah went to Huldah, there's an assumption that while in the previous sentence it said that Yoshiyahu said, go inquire of the Lord, the assumption is that if Chilkiyahu went to Huldah, he was not doing this on his own. He went to Huldah at the direction of Yoshiyahu. This decision was made by Yoshiyahu, and I think one could assume that to be true. Says the Gemara, the Yoshiyahu Gufei Echa Shavik Yirmiyahu V'Shardeh L'Gaba. Why is it that instead of going to Yirmiyahu, they go to Huldah? Amrei Debei Rabbi Shila, 2 reasons. Number one, and very close to what you're saying, Milton, Mipnei Shahanashim Rachmaniyotin.
The merciful.
Women are merciful. I would want to add to that When you're coming off 5 years of prophecy, and you're talking about the decay of Judah, is this the person you want to instinctively go to? You have to think about that a little bit. You know, you're into the decay mode. Maybe there was this feeling, my goodness, what are we looking for? I want to speak to somebody who's going to give me a lift, not somebody who's going to put me down. The way they put it is that women are more merciful than men. Then there's a second reason, which I'm very proud to read to you, and that is Rabbi Yochanan Omer, Yirmiyah. Why did he go to Yirmiyah? Lo havahatam. He wasn't around. Where was he? Where was he? Sheholach lahachzir aseret hashvatim. He was up north trying to inspire those living up there to reunite with the south. He didn't answer the phone. He wasn't around. He was too busy to mind the store in Judea. So they go, this is the Gemara now, Megillah Daf Yudal and Bet. They go now to Chuda. And what does Chuda say? Vatome Aleim. And Chuda says, Ko Amar Adonai Elohei Yisrael. Thus says the Lord, the God of Israel. Imru la'ish asher shalachet v'nelai. Go back to the person who sent you. Who is that person? Yoshiyahu, and tell them the following. Ko Amar Adonai. Very powerful. Normally it's a man, a male prophet who says, thus says the Lord. Here's a woman, Huldah, who says, also had it directly from God. Thus says the Lord. Hineni mevi ra'a el hamakom hazeh va'al yoshvav. It's really something. He, Yoshiyahu, is full of hope. And what does Huldah say? Behold, I am going to bring evil on this place, va'al yoshvav, and on its inhabitants. Et kol divrei hasefer asher kara melech Yudah. All of the consequences of disobeying God, which the king of Judah, which Yoshiyahu read, will come about. Why is this though? So, Tachat Asher Azavuni, because the people, God says, have left me. Vayikatru leLohim Achirim, and they forsook me and have made offerings to other gods. Leman hachiseni b'chol ma'aseh yedehem, to vex me with all their deeds. Chamoti b'makom hazeh, my wrath is kindled against this place. Below tichbe, and it will not be quenched. Now, this is what it's sort of like, wow, oh my goodness, what a damper. Now, one could look at this and argue a little bit differently, that what Huldah was doing, this is short term and there's long term. She's saying long term it's going to be to no avail. Yoshiyahu does very well. We're in the 18th year. He reigns for 31 years. For the next 13 years they do very well. And there are going to be 4 more kings. 3 were his sons who are going to rule afterwards. Actually, the last king of Judah was his son, Tzidkiyahu. But in the end, 22 years after Yoshiyahu's death, and he dies a terrible death, we'll talk about that. Because Yirmiyahu was prophesying through this whole period. That's going to be another stage of his prophecy. So, in the end, Judea is destroyed. I mean, you could read this and say that she's saying there's hope, no hope now, or you can read it that she was really speaking long term. It does say, Ve'el melech Yudah sholech etchem lidrosh et Adonai ko tonu elav. And to the king, say the following, Ko amar Adonai lo yisod v'rem asher shamata. This is what you should say. Sentence 19. Yan rach levavcha, because your heart was softened, and you humbled yourself before the Lord when you heard what I decreed against this place and its inhabitants, that it will become a desolation and a curse. And because you rent your clothes and went before me, I, for my part, have listened, declares the Lord. Assuredly, let me take this up. Assuredly, you don't have it, but I do have it. Just another sentence or two. What does she say? Assuredly, I will gather you to your fathers, and you will be laid in your tomb in peace. Your eyes shall not see all the disaster which I will bring upon this place. So they brought back their reply to the king. Clearly, she's talking long term. You will when you die, this will not yet happen, but long term, it's not good. I just want to say this, and I want to
This
get
is when
everybody's.
Echa was written.
I just want to say another word. It's in this framework that Jeremiah is prophesying. Yes, they went to Huldah to get Huldah's reaction, but Judah comes back from the north. Now, what is Jeremiah's position at this point? Now, he sees Yoshiyahu is full of this hope, the Rebbe's optimism. What is going to be his position? And this, in fact, is the framework of the next period of his prophecy. Throughout Jeremiah, we have punctuated different passages, different paragraphs that speak to what Jeremiah says at this point during the time of Reformation. And you'll see that it vacillates between words of hope. Then there are going to be words from Jeremiah where he looks at the people.
Echa.
There will be. This is not Echa. This is not Echa.
I know, but it was at this time, they said, tradition, according to tradition,
I have a question.
he wrote Echa.
Yes, he did, but the question is, did he write it now in the time of Reformation, or does he write it later?
After the
He
whole
writes it later, not at this point. So it's gonna. This is the time of hope.
What
And-
hope?
and-
He's
well,
prophesying.
Estelle, you're up.
My
The
question.
clean hitter is up.
No. My question is, if Josiah was in the field of hope, and that means he's trying to turn his
Yes.
people that way, what about God's forgiveness? I mean, what is this nonsense that they have the hope and then there's no hope if God's going to destroy them anyway?
It's a good question. Let's see, but by the way, let's understand something. Because Maimonides talks about this in his introduction to his commentary to the Mishnah, which he wrote at the age of 19, if you could believe it. As we say in a Jewish expression, holy cow. 19. He wrote the Perush HaMishnayot. God. He finished his Yad HaChazakah, I think he was 41. Oh, give me a break. It's like a guy who gets a second doctorate. Those are the guys I hate. The second doctorate you have to get. One doctorate's not enough, Anyway, so the reality is that even though Huldah says that ultimately the temple will be destroyed, there have been many prophets who went into prophecy where there was a forecast of destruction, who went amongst the people and preached, and it turned around. Because a prophet says that something negative will occur, the job of the prophet is then to encourage a return, and if there's a return, that prophecy can be undone.
Well, it's not been undone.
Not in this particular case, but there are cases where it was undone. Take Nineveh. There was God says it's going to be destroyed. Forget about the prophet. God says it's going to be destroyed. Jonah goes, and what does Jonah say? He doesn't want to go, and who wants to go to Nineveh? Nineveh is the enemy of the Jewish people. It's going to Assyria. He goes 180 degrees in the opposite direction. He goes to Spain. He wants to have nothing to do with it. But God says, hey, this is your responsibility. And he goes. He ultimately goes. And the city repents.
But this is Jeremiah's responsibility, and the city doesn't.
Let's see now.
But if he's prophesying, he's exhorting them to return, to become cohesive, and she's prophesying doom and gloom. So are they working
No,
with each other,
she
working
is
against
prophesying.
each other?
She prophesies doom and gloom for 40 years from now.
So then what's
She's
the
not-
point? If I were the people, I'd say, what's the point? We're all headed for disaster.
Absolutely.
What,
No.
what,
I
what
agree.
avail
No, but the way
would they
I hear that. But the way, absolutely, there's a lot of work to be done. But in fact, if there would be a true reformation, the prophecy of Huldah could be turned on its head.
But they don't understand that. She's not saying
But
that.
this is Yirmiyahu's task. Yirmiyahu now is in this bind.
So then
He's
he's
aware
not
of
good
what
enough? He
he's
doesn't
aware of what
see?
Huldah said. He's aware of it. He's aware of Yoshiyahu's promise of hope. And he's right in the middle of this. let's read,
But he's battling the people
we're gonna end
and
by
children.
reading 5 sentences, which I think is a good first take of Jeremiah's words during this period of time. Let's take a look at chapter 18, this is pretty well known. Sentence 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. This is the prophecy of the potter and his clay. It's page
Oh, that's-
125. The prophecy of the potter and the clay. Page 125. Let's read it through and let's see what happens. Hadavar asher haya el Yirmiyahu me'et Adonai lemor. The word which came to Jeremiah from the Lord, saying, Kum, rise, v'yaradita bet hayotzer, and go down to the potter's house, v'shama ashmiyacha et dvarai, and there I will cause you to listen to my words. Now this is very, very common in the prophets, because God could have told Jeremiah his words without telling him to go down to a potter's house. But go down to the potter's house because there's something that it's sort of like when we were kids we used to call it show and tell. I don't know what the modern terminology is.
Show and tell.
Show and tell. I want you to experience something, and through seeing something, by seeing something real, you're going to have a deeper understanding of what my message is to you. This is now God speaking to Yirmiyahu. Go down to the potter's house. Sentence 3. Va'ered bet hayotzer. And I went down to the potter's house. It's a Greek tip. V'ihinehu, it's 2 words. V'ihinehu oseh melacha al ha'avnayim. And behold, he was at work at his wheels.
The women of Israel
Very, very nice.
gave
Excellent,
birth on the
Jessica.
Avnayim.
Right, in the Exodus story.
Right.
When Pharaoh says to the midwives, kill the sons who are born, the women would give birth, the language is on the stone stools, al ha'avnayim. And it's interesting, the avnayim there is understood to mean that these midwives refused to kill these infant boys. And from that really came the redemption. So when the reader sees this word avnayim, it's a very unusual term. Avnayim, it's a very unusual term. One thinks back to the book of Exodus, a lot of reading Tanakh is words resonate. That word avnayim brings, it's a redemptive term.
We would think it would be Avanim, wouldn't we?
Or one can think about probably the paragraph where the word Evan is found most often is when Jacob leaves home. Do you remember? And he puts his head on a stone. There's a lot of stones there. What's the Hebrew for stone? Evan. I believe that Evan, and it's been said that Evan is a composite of 2 words. Evan. What are the first 2 letters? Av.
Av and Ben.
And what are the last 2 letters?
Ben.
Ben. Av, Ben. Av, Ben. Avnayim is a play on father and son. Lineage, passing down from the previous generation to this generation. Uitem al Avnayim, it's a redemptive term that speaks to the message of a tradition of the past being passed down from parent to child, and then it's redemptive through the Avnayim. Ultimately, a son will be born. And now let's see what he says. You will see in the potter's house that he's at work on the wheels. V'nishchat hakli asher hu oseh b'chomer b'yad hayotzer. And whensoever the vessel that he made of the clay was marred in the hand of the potter, v'shav v'yasehu kli acher, he made it again another vessel. Kashe yashab be'enei hayotzer laso, as seemed good to the potters to make it. Now I want to take it in the JPS translation. So here's a JPS translation of the sentence which we just read. It's chapter 18. And here's what he says. And if the vessel he was making was spoiled, as happens to clay in the potter's hands, he would make it into another vessel, such as the potter saw fit to make. Hold on, let's see
You
further.
say it
2
in
more
Tefillah.
sentences. Vayhi dvar Adonai Eli le'imor. Now, so he goes down and he sees that this is what, is the term potter? Is that the term? This is what the potter is doing. And he sees what the potter is doing. He's molding the clay, sees that it's spoiled. What does he do with it?
He remakes it.
He casts it aside, or he reshapes it and pushes away that which is not working and remolds it. And what happens then? Something new emerges.
Bingo.
Vayhi dvar Adonai Eli le'imor, and the word of the Lord came to me saying, Hachayotzer hazeh lo uchal lasot lachem. I get the chills when I read this. Bet Yisrael ne'um Adonai. Let's read it from your translation.
Well, this is from the Tefillah.
It's from the Tefillah of Yom Kippur.
Yom Kippur.
O house of Israel, can not I do with you as this potter, says the Lord?
No.
Hinei kachomer b'yad hayotzer, behold, as the clay in the potter's hand. Kein atem biadi bet Yisrael. So are you in my hands, O house of Israel. Rega adaber al goy v'al mamlacha. At one instant I may speak concerning a nation and concerning a kingdom. Lintosh v'lintot ulavi. Those are the exact words we found in chapter 2. The prophecy of Judah's decay. Concerning kingdom to pluck and to break and to destroy. Vish. And what will I do with that? That's the pottery that what will I do? I'm going to cast it aside. I will reshape it, redo it. Vishav hagoy hahu me'ra'atot asher dibarti alav. But if that nation turn from their evil because of which I have spoken against it, v'nichamti al hara'ah asher chashavti la'asot lo. I will repent of the evil that I thought to do onto it. And that word v'nichamti, to the reader of the Bible, brings us back to the story of...
Noah. God regrets having made man.
That's true.
God repents.
It's repent. But let me say that that's very true. But I'm thinking of another piece, and that is after the Jewish people build the golden calf in Exodus, chapter 32, 33, 34, what does God say? They built the golden calf, what will I do? I'm going to destroy the people. What does Moses do?
He begs.
Moses intervenes, and even though God said, I will this is not the prophet, this is not Huldah, this is God says, I will destroy, Moses intervenes and says, hey, God, come on, you can't do this. And then the words in the Torah is, Vayinachem Hashem. That's the language. The Lord repented. The Lord changed his mind. So this prophecy of Yirmiyahu is a prophecy where he's saying, don't give up hope. There's hope. Yoshiyahu is the king of hope, of optimism in this Reformation. Huldah says, hey, you came to me, I've got to tell you what I'm seeing now. At this point, in my crystal ball, I see that 40 years from now we're in a lot of trouble. But Yirmiyahu at this point, in chapter 18, in this very well-known few sentences, this prophecy of the pottery, you can see it's called The Potter and His Clay, says, there's hope. There's hope. We have the capacity to turn it around, to reshape, to get rid of the negativity, to turn it into something positive. We have hope. Now what we're going to find out in next week is that Yirmiyahu's prophecy of this time, during this period of time, is it's not a prophecy of one path. He's going to be saying a lot of different things. He's going to, over here he seems to be saying, oh, Yoshiyahu, there is hope. And we're going to see next week there are other times where he comes down very hard and says, yeah, there has been a return, but it's all superficial. It's empty, it's barren. Inwardly, there's really no real return. And this is the second stage of Yirmiyah's prophecy, which we're going to, God willing, complete next week, because I really want to move quickly through Yirmiyah to get a whole sense of the larger picture, and then that will take us to the third stage of Yirmiyah's prophecy. And the third stage of Yirmiyah's prophecy is going to be the tragic death of Yoshiyahu. In the end, this great king Yoshiyahu is going to die a terrible, terrible death. He's going to be killed by the king of Egypt. He doesn't want the king of Egypt to go to Israel to fight up north. We'll talk about it because one has to get a sense of the politics of that moment. And it's then that we're going to see a different prophecy coming from Jeremiah. We'll open it up for a few moments, and then I've got to get on this conference
My
call.
question is
Yes.
a hardware question.
Yes.
Not software. I was surprised by the presence of the scroll. I didn't know they had already begun to put the law down onto parchment, onto scrolls. So when do we date that? We don't know, do we?
You know, I don't know. I think that the Torah talks about, the Torah does say at the end of Dvarim, but, you know, keep forward Sefer Torah. So it does say, write the Sefer Torah. Sounds like they had the scroll, but I really gotta ask my son.
They have not.
Do we
None
have-
have been found in excavations, have there? Scrolls.
I don't know, I'll ask it's like my son is an expert in the Tanchuma, which is a midrash. I said, Doug, I'm giving a shiur in the Tanchuma. When, it's a rabbinic teaching, I said, when was the Tanchuma written? I'm giving a class in a minute. I said, when was the Tanchuma written? He says, Abi, got 8 months. I said, no, I got 8 months. I got 8 seconds, you know. It's complicated, so I'm not sure. But the Torah does use the term, Kitfu, it's Sefer Torah, so I believe it uses that.